Hey, what's going on, guys? In this video, I want to talk about the doomer misery loop and 5 reasons why you're stuck in it. This is why are you stuck in this loop of you either unemployed or in some job that you hate, and there's just no forward progress in your life. You know, you're miserable, you have a very poor self-image, poor outlook. So essentially, the doomer mindset is kind of like a tree. And the trunk of the tree has the word self-loathing written in huge letters on it. And the roots of this tree go underground. So it's up to you to figure out where the root of your self-loathing is. But being what it is, the trunk of self-loathing has many branches that spring off of it. And these branches are vices. So we're going to talk about 5 main reasons that you're stuck with a doomer mindset, living a life that you hate, and working a job that you hate, that you don't feel that you belong at, and so on, and so on, and so on. So the first reason that I would say, and these are not in any order, but I would say that this is the number one thing that is the reason why you have a doomer mindset and why you can't move forward in life. The number one reason I would say, if I was to rank it, would be this, is that your true talent is unrealized. All right. So your true talent, the thing that is naturally in your DNA to do, has not been realized. And there's many reasons for that. And I would say that the main reason that your talent is not realized is because of technology, because we have too many things that are doing things for us. And you're never able to be put to the test in which the talent is able to reveal itself. Because basically the thing about talent and discovering talent is that you're able to see it when you're tested in some sort of way. It reveals itself once you're put to some kind of strenuous test, right? So nowadays, for example, when I go walking, I'm almost every day run over by some Zoomer on an e-bike. And I noticed it the other day. I thought, wow, you know, Zoomers don't even exert themselves to ride a bike because they got that e-bike. And I see them pedaling so smoothly and so slowly, and their mind is completely blank. Their face is completely smoothed over, right? There's not a sweat is being broken in the hot sun because they're on that e-bike, and they got the big headphones that cover the whole entire ear on. You know, so the main thing to kind of take away from everything is that technology corrupts human character. And if you want to read a novel that really highlights this, you need to read a novel called Things Fall Apart. And I think the author's name is Chinua Achebe. This was taught in high school. And at first you may think, oh, this is this book that is about, you know, colonialism in Africa. No, this is a book that is about how technology corrupts the human spirit and the human spiritual capabilities. So, you know, your true talent in the modern world is probably never going to be discovered if your whole life is doing what anyone else can do, which is play on a computer, play on a phone. Like, pretty much for the most part, all of these sort of automated, convenient types of jobs, there's something that anyone can actually do. That's a huge problem. You know, so the main reason that you're in a job that you hate is because you've never been able to realize your talent, because you've never been put to some kind of test for that to emerge. So another example of this is playing musical instruments. You know, young people nowadays who are used to playing video games and pushing buttons on a video game controller, they're going to have a hard time playing the guitar, doing something like that. You know, if you scroll and your attention span is no longer than 3 seconds, it's going to be very hard for you to learn actual melody lines on the guitar. It's going to be hard for you to memorize clumps of notes, musical information. And I know this because I teach guitar, right? So I had mentioned in a previous video that by, you know, failing in my corporate career, I've moved on to a post-career life. And that post-career life is that I have a remote job that is going well, and is I have no complaints about. I'm not going to talk about that right now. But then I have a second job that is semi-professional music, guitar playing as I'll play at cafes and venues. Sometimes I'll play for special events like fundraisers and things. And I'll play for 4 hours and usually get paid like $120. And then I teach lessons. So I teach lessons after my remote corporate job. So I'm sort of independent from being just a wage slave, because even though the money from music is not more than my corporate job, it is consistent. So, if I end up getting some sort of promotion at the corporate job, then I could just put more money from my music passion and my music side hustle, quote unquote, into my Vanguard account, right? Just put it away for retirement, put in my investments, save it, do whatever, buy another guitar, who knows? So, but the point is that prior to me becoming a guitar teacher and having music as a safety net and side income and all this kind of thing, it was unrealized talent for many, many, many years, because my talent for music was pointed out to me by my guitar instructor when I was almost immediately after I first started playing. And then pretty much what happened was I stopped taking guitar lessons once I began to teach myself. I was able to figure songs out by ear, and this is sort of what was a huge problem, actually. Like, it led to the unrealized talent, because if I continued with an actual teacher, I would have learned music theory at a far younger age as I'm teaching it to my young students. Like, that's the thing, is that I had a guitar teacher who had the same kind of standard cliche guitar instructor mentality, which was, the student brings in a CD and then you're taught that, but there's no deeper musical lesson learned. I actually teach kids arpeggios and just all the complex things that you learn in jazz guitar and stuff like that. I teach that from the ground up, like from the moment that they actually start playing. I kind of teach them these important things that'll be used infinitely as guitar players. That wasn't really pointed out to me when I was taking lessons. And the other thing is that I come from a family in which I'm the only one with musical talent. So what it really boils down to is, when I was getting good at the guitar and having more passion for it, my parents and my family would tell me that it was just a fun hobby. They wouldn't really recognize it at all, like, let alone actually think that I could make an income off of it. And another thing about this was my grandpa would say that he said this so many times about my guitar playing ability. He would say, yeah, the studies show that people who are gifted with music are gifted at math and computer programming, and both of those things, math and computer programming, I have no interest in whatsoever. I hate computers, in fact. Computers, I feel like, are the devil to me, and I'm on one right now, but be that as it may, it just is what it is. So, but I hate computers, and I hate, the idea of programming a computer. I have no interest in it whatsoever. And math, same thing. I'm more artistic. I like stories, and I like the right brain type stuff. So the point is that my grandpa, he didn't look at the musical talent as something that could make money itself. He was just like, oh, that just means that you could have an aptitude for a career that could make you money, like programming, and that never happened, because I had no interest in it. Instead, I just ended up making money off of the actual guitar playing, the actual talent, so that was, unfortunately, like, I was sort of thinking about it wrong, just because people around me didn't see anything really special about it. Or, I mean, even when I would play guitar as a teenager, my parents found it annoying. So, for the most part, if your talent is not really supported, then you're going to have a hard time. It's going to, the point is that my problem that I had, and why I didn't realize my talent, was that I didn't realize it myself. I didn't just say, I wasn't confident myself and said, no, I am actually a guitar player. I am a talented guitar player. Like, that was my problem. I was waiting for people around me, like my parents or my grandpa or whoever, to, give me the green light, so to speak. That was my issue. But when I started to run out of money with these stupid corporate jobs not working out, and, this was like pandemic time period, I actually just started Googling guitar instructor jobs in my city, and then I applied for one, and then 2 months later I got called for it, and I went out for an audition, and the owner of the music academy hired me right on the spot. So, that took many years to lead up to that point, but thank God I got there. Thank God I've got here right now, because it really is a big part of my life. Music is a big part of my life now. I don't have to worry about being a doomer wage slave with nothing else going for him, right? So that's the first thing. Your true talent has been unrealized. And the other thing I would mention is that if you just do a Google search of the parable of the hidden talent, this is a New Testament story in the book of Matthew, I believe. And it just talks about what happens to people who don't realize their talent, and how the man in the story who did not realize his talent was a man of self-loathing. So again, the doomer mindset is indeed a tree of self-loathing. The roots, you got to figure out where they come from. You got to get to the root of it. And until then, many branches of vices will be branching off of that tree. So the second thing I want to talk about with the doomer mindset, why you're stuck in this job that you hate, this life that you can't transcend from. You receive financial help from family or the government. There is nothing more that breeds and just is like fertilizer for that garden of self-loathing, that tree of self-loathing. There's nothing more that fertilizes it than receiving financial bailouts from either your parents or the government. And the reason why is because the person receiving the handout becomes loathsome and hateful, and pretty much is always expecting the next thing, or just having a very self-loathing attitude. And then the people who give the gift of it, who are giving the gift, they sort of hate the person too, because they don't believe that they can do something on their own. So it's just this two-way street of hate, pretty much. And low self-esteem, low self-confidence, no forward progression, just this woe is me type stuff. Victimhood is pretty much what it's just a channel of victimhood, and it just perpetuates the doomer mindset. Now with a lot of us though, there's not much you can do about this. There's not much you can actually do about this. But the first thing I would say is stop accepting gifts. If it's a gifted to you, just say, I had told my parents, I said, I just don't want any more money at all, period. Like, not for birthdays, nothing. I just don't. And that is pretty much what you have to do. Now, in our present day, it's kind of crazy, because there are people who are married with kids and have a house and a mortgage and stuff, and their parents will help them out with that. The parents have pretty much, when parents and other people invest in you financially, then they kind of control you. And just as an example, we all know this with Hollywood, and how if you sign your name in blood with the devil, you got to dance when the devil says to, and how whatever, you're pretty much a puppet at that point. So whoever pays you pretty much controls you. And if your parents are giving you money, then they're naturally going to feel like they have the right to criticize you all you want, and that you're going to have no right to criticize back whatsoever. It's just going to be like that. So in order to stop that, you have to stop the cycle of it, because it'll just go on and on and on. It'll turn and turn and turn. All right. So the third reason that you are likely stuck in the doomer trap, this internal hell that it is because you lack a genuine network of friends. And this kind of goes back to not straining yourself in any sort of way, not putting yourself through some discomfort. And this is where most friendships kind of come out of. You meet people randomly. One of this years ago, there was a really awesome band that was in my local town, and I was having a conversation with the bass player. I was like, "Oh man, how'd you all meet?" And he was talking about how in college He said that he was like late for a class, and then the professor had the door locked, so he goes outside to smoke a cigarette, and there was another dude smoking too, and he was wearing like a Velvet Underground t-shirt, and the bass player just struck up a conversation, and then it was revealed that he played guitar and his brother played drums, and they formed a trio, and the rest is history. It just happened just like that. They didn't meet each other through some sort of app looking for bandmates or something like that. They didn't have a checklist in mind. He, in his head, was into garage rock and had a passion for it in his heart. And then just through happenstance of just being outside, he sees another dude with the Velvet Underground t-shirt. They become friends. The band forms. The rest is history. You know, another example of this is like when I used to work at the grocery store as a teenager, I didn't have one friend there when I got hired, but I had so many friends that were made over the years from just working at the grocery store, who were people who went to different schools, you know, had different things in common. It didn't matter. You know, there was a deeper connection than just common interests. You know what I'm saying? Like, some people are just good to talk to. You know, one example of this is, you know, when I worked at the grocery store, they would have these keg parties, and everyone would go, from the people who were the baggers to the people who worked in the meat department, the deli people, even the sort of low-level managers would actually go to these Publix parties. And it was almost like an unspoken thing that this was just special, and that nobody was going to tell on each other the next day. Like, you know, it's not like the, you know, front area manager was going to go was going to say something about the, you know, baggers, the 20-year-old grocery baggers, you know, having a few beers underage or something. It wasn't like that. You know, it was positive. You know, it was supposed to be positive, and positivity is what followed, because when we would have these Publix parties, it was always a Halloween party too. Like, everyone would dress up and stuff like that. Those were great times. That's what friendships came out of, from, you know, just people who had to work these long hours together, work these, you know, day before Thanksgiving. I remember it was always like, you know, just trying to get through the day with this madhouse that the grocery store was. You know, those are good times where you have to, I wouldn't show up at the grocery store one day if I wasn't paid for it, but I tell you what, the friends that I had during those shifts were priceless. You know, some of those shifts that we had were priceless. They were hilarious. You know, we would even do little pranks on each other at the grocery store. And like I said, these were people that, for the most part, we had nothing in common in terms of, you know, these weren't people like I was forming bands with and stuff like that. No. But they were just good people, you know, that I still look back on fondly to this day. So, you know, I think that the problem is that nowadays, because people live online, they have a sort of checklist mentality of what they need in a friend. They, you know, they even for a friend, they ask, like, what value is this person going to bring to my life? Like, I hate that kind of talk, because that's just so anti-human. That's so dehumanizing to look at friends that way, you know? And, you know, when it comes to friends, you can't have like these high expectations that, you know, every friend is someone that you're going to have a deep conversation, you know, therapy session with. You know, sometimes it's good to have friends that you can just go out to the ale house and get, you know, some fried chicken zingers and, you know, just hang out. It doesn't have to be this whole thing of your friend's got to be this, that, and the other thing. And I think that mentality, that checklist mentality, is truly sick. And it would never exist if it wasn't for the way that people use the internet and the modern technology to communicate with each other, and the way that, you know, like, for example, ghosting people and stuff like that. That's commonplace nowadays, because, you know, especially with meeting people off the internet, you couldn't do that. You couldn't really stand someone up when you lived in a community which everyone really knew what one another did in real life, and this thing called gossip would naturally spread if you were a rotten person. You know, you wouldn't, quote unquote, just do that to somebody, but this is where we're at right now, you know? So, lacking a genuine network of friends. You know, this is also the reason why a lot of people are broke, living in some corporate apartment complex where they're just stuck paying most of their paycheck to some terrible corporate landlord. because they don't have friends that they can like split a house with, like split rent on a house, or they don't have a friend who owns a house that they can rent a room out of. Like, for example, right now, I hear all these men who, want to own property, but if you're just a single person and you have a house, you will no doubt probably need tenants, unless you want to clean every floor and every room yourself. If you're single, you're going to need tenants. So for the most part, I don't care that my friend who I've known for almost 20 years owns this house. The whole second floor is the size of my old apartment, and I treat it like my own apartment. His third floor area is pretty much the size of a small apartment, and on the first floor, it's like the same situation for the roommate down there. So that's the bottom line, is that people need to rethink this whole thing of property ownership. If you own property, you need tenants. You're going to have people living with you, So kind of getting into a better living situation, renting a room from a friend who owns the house. If I didn't have this friend from way back in the day, which, to be honest with you, actually looking back on it, as funny as it is, the room that I rent was from my best friend's, was renting this room before it. He moved out, got married, all this kind of thing years ago. That's how I got to know my friend who lives upstairs / current landlord. Was my best friend. He was the manager at the grocery store. Like, the guy who owns the house once was a retail manager, bought the house, whatever. My best friend worked at his store. They became roommates. And then I became the roommate later on in the future, like now. So we had known each other from back then. I had lived here previously, years ago. And then I moved back in, all these years later. So this wasn't an Airbnb. This wasn't me going on Zillow. That didn't come from any of that. This guy thought of me. He thought about me. He hit me up. He said, "Hey, this room is available. Where are you living now?" This kind of thing. But we had kept in touch, because we, the friends that I've had from all growing up, we always usually get together once per year for a Christmas party. So that's the bottom line. Genuine network of friends. You don't have them because you have been online. You've been meeting people through Call of Duty, playing games online, console games online. All of that breeds deception too. Like, the internet is basically, nobody's what they seem. Everything is a sort of variation of some kind of catfish situation. Like my old roommate, for example, back when I lived in the corporate apartment complex, you know what I mean? Like, living there for years. My old roommate at the time, he met a girl through playing Call of Duty online. And surprise, surprise, but a lot of the girls that you meet on these video game things are the type of girls who talk to multiple dudes and seem to be excited by watching these sort of nerdy gamer guys fight over her. This is it's almost like an archetype of girl who does this nowadays. So he actually went out with a girl like this for a couple years, and it was just, the other boyfriend from some other dude who was a gamer, from a different city. Like, these are the types of people that you can meet if you're the type of person who lives on the internet. So it's just gonna just keep that cycle turning of doomerism, because you get involved with people like this, they can really screw up your outlook even more, and make it even harder and more awkward for you to meet people in real life. So, best way to do all of this. So imagine this. Let's say you get a job at a place where there's, just a lot of people your age. Like, working at a restaurant, for example, is a great place to start for young people, I think. This is the type of place where you kind of have to work as a team. You have to work together. You have to get through those busy shifts together, I'd say restaurants, probably the easiest to get a job there to start off, and to then, try to get more acclimated with that. Because I noticed that even young people who work at the restaurants where there's servers and bartenders and whatnot, they're not quite as socially inept as the people you see kind of at these stores nowadays, where they're just manning a self-checkout, and they, let's say you ring up an item twice and they come over and it's an awkward thing of them saying, oh yeah, you got to do this now. They kind of sort of tell you how you're supposed to do the job, so to speak, ring up your own stuff. It's not the same experience. So you would want to look for a place that is where you can function as a team. There's evidence of cohesion. That's how you're going to make some friends. And you just got to allow yourself to get into real life and let the Wheel of Fortune take over. Because I think that the enemy of the Wheel of Fortune is the internet. It's creating all of this social discord, right? So another reason that you're stuck in the doomer misery cycle, the misery loop, is that you chose a path that was all about the money, either easy money or money only, meaning that a lot of folks will leave their hometown for a job and they'll just be completely on their own. And so the only way that they can actually meet people is if they go through the internet in some type of way, try to find friends or date people and stuff like that. And it really all depends what type of job that you have. But for the most part, whenever you choose something for either easy money or for the money only, like you don't care about anything else, you're going to get stuck in a cycle that you probably don't like. And, one example of that, like I said, you move, let's say you get a job as a computer programmer somewhere in a different town, you take the job, you're in some expensive apartment, and then you're living paycheck to paycheck. It's not worth it. You have no friends, and pretty much all you do is work for this corporate entity, pay the rent to the corporate landlord, and you're just like a cog in the machine in that way. So you don't want to choose something only for the money. Like, you don't want to abandon the social opportunities. Like, if you leave your hometown, all these people that you've known for your whole life, what connections do you really have out there? Are you really going to put yourself out there? You're going to see how hard it is to connect with anyone. So choosing a path that is all about the money, only about the money, that's going to lead to a misery cycle. And the last thing I would say is that, why are you stuck in a job that you hate? Why are you in this doomer mindset? You have vices that prevent you from moving on. And one example of this is, let's say that a person sits around and scrolls on their phone all day, and they're just full of envy and sloth. Like, they're just lazy. Let's say that, there's a person who goes online and they're just like, man, I'm so sick and tired of these fitness influencers, blah, blah, blah. And it just amplifies you're out of shape, yourself, you're not physically fit. You're going to be envious, and then you're just sitting there too. Like, you could put down the phone and abandon these resentful emotions entirely and just focus on your physical fitness and actually spend 40 minutes just straight up walking, which would do more for you in 40 minutes than sitting there and being on your smartphone for 40 minutes. Believe it or not, sitting there for 40 minutes on your butt, with your blood pooling in your legs, your neck is down staring at the screen. The screen is staring back at you, emitting the whatever artificial UV light, which apparently hurts your eyes. All of it is harmful, is what I'm getting at. Is that in 40 minutes of you just going outside, walking straight on the sidewalk, you're going to get more out of that and actually do something positively to you physically, cardiovascular health, than doing anything on your phone, just sitting there. So that's another reason. These vices are so easy to get wrapped up in nowadays. Like, other examples of vices that prevent you from moving on. One example of a story from my past was, I had quit one terrible job, and was forced to take another, right? And because I was working in this sales job, having to do a sleazy sales job was kind of pretty much what I was forced to do for a little while right after that. So I got a job at this call center that would sell like vacation packages over the phone. I mean, we still get calls to this day from these people who, they call up and they try to convince the person on the phone that, you do you remember, this raffle or whatever, you want some tickets to Disney. It's all based off of lies, and it's just terrible. It was the most disgusting place like I ever had to work, because the people there were people who could have been like fresh out of prison. There's people on probation there. It was basically the type of place that the very bottom of society, like, it was there. I remember sitting with a dude when I was quote unquote training at this place, and he was like, his boss had given him a leaflet saying he had to close 2 more deals by the end of the week or else he'd be fired. And he was a dude that had one of those vapes that was like, back in 2015, it was like those ones that had like it almost looked like a socket wrench or something, like some kind of tool in a toolbox, because it had the handle, right there, and then you would hit it and it would hiss, and then you'd blow a huge, massive cloud of smoke that looked like dry ice. And at that call center, it was so funny because you weren't supposed to vape inside, but everyone would do it and then blow it underneath their desk. They'd be like on a call at the time, take a huge vape hit and then just blow it under the desk. It was terrible, and this guy, he was in this job because the police pulled him over and they found a Xanax pill, and he did not have a prescription. So he was on, I guess, probation for I think that if you get caught with pills like that, it's actually a felony or something, maybe. I don't know. Point is, though, is that this guy had that going against him. So, these vices, of course, it's so sad to hear someone say, it wasn't even my pill. Like, my friend dropped it in the car and I didn't even know it. I mean, that's some terrible luck right there if that's the case. But everything in me was like, this guy's lying about it. He's just singing that song, telling that lie. It's terrible when you're just sitting there right there, and then the person is, because that lie is almost like, it's almost like an invisible Band-Aid. Like, they could never admit to them, and it's just a sign that they can never admit to themselves that they have a serious problem. But yeah, vices are the sort of things that will keep you in a job that you hate, and they'll keep that doomer mindset going, because, man, there's nothing more that is like the fertilizer of self-loathing other than shame. Doing these things that create a shameful dark cloud over your head. So in a nutshell, these are some of the things that came to my mind earlier. If there was 5 things to really pin down why you're stuck with this doomer misery loop that you're living in, and you can't transcend it, you can't move on, it's one of these 5 reasons. Number 1, your true talent has not been realized. You're going to unfortunately, this is the number 1 thing. You're probably going to be punished with having to live in these stupid jobs until you actually take some action with that. And part of the reason that your talent may be unrealized is because this technology has obscured your ability to find it. You've never been really put to the test in some sort of way in which, whether it's a personality quality or a physical attribute or musical talent, visual art. Like, for example, when I was a high school teacher that first year, we had a lot of projects and things we had to do. And there was a dude in the class who, he really stunk at English for the most part, at writing and everything like that. His handwriting was terrible, all this kind of thing. But believe it or not, the dude actually could draw. He could draw, and he told me at the end of the year, he came up to me so proud with his final project. The cover, like, basically he did like some cover art for his project, and it was just a beautiful charcoal, like, I mean, his shading, everything was just raw talent. And his face was beaming, and he had said to me, he said, I never would have discovered this talent without you. I never would have discovered this talent without you. The fact that I actually required, I said, you got, if you're going to do one aspect of this project, you got to draw this movie, or, you got to make a movie poster off of this book that we had to read. And, that dude, man, he was just, I knew it was just, he was going to develop that ability from there, because even people in the class, they were truly impressed with what he had been capable of. And like I said, he came into the class like he always had his head down, kind of low self-esteem, and then by the end of the year, he was an artist. He was an aspiring artist. And I wish him the best of luck with all that, because he found out what he was capable of. And, if it wasn't necessarily, became a professional artist or whatever, then he discovered his eye for art, his ability to see things in a different perspective. So, that's the whole thing. You got to be put to the test in order to figure out what the talent is. You got to get thrown into something. And it's the same thing with friends. You have to be thrown into the mix. You have to be engaged. You have to be on the wheel of fortune, leaving everything up to chance. Who are you going to be stuck with for this project? Who are you going to be stuck bagging groceries for 8 hours? Who are you going to be in that driver's ed class, sitting there, or like, let's say you get a driving ticket or whatever, and then you got to attend one of those 5-hour classes to get it off your license. Hey, you could meet your future spouse in, in one of them driver's classes that you got to take, and you have the commonality of that you both suck at driving, right? So, being thrown into things is the best thing that can happen. And, so that's the same thing with your true talent is not realized. You haven't been thrown into things. You had, receiving financial help from your family, detrimental. That's another thing. You have to be thrown into brokenness. The parents should only bail you out if you're physically in jail, and you got to get out of there. That's really what it all comes down to. That's the only time your parents should really bail you out, so to speak, is if you're physically in jail. And like I said, when you choose something for easy money, it's going to suck. Like if you choose, let's say you're a sales rep, for example, you do everything that you do, the job is just for the money. Well, one day, for the most part, salesmen are sort of like crops. Once they get to a certain point, you have to harvest them. It's almost like how you got to prune plants. Like when they get too long, the branches are too long, too big, and all this kind of thing. You got to cut it down and regrow it, right? That's how sales managers think. So once you are making too much money as a salesperson, they're going to want to cut you. And then what's going to happen there is you're going to have to find another sales company and start all over again. So this is what happens. Most people get into sales. Why? Because of the money. They wouldn't sell the product any other way if they weren't getting that fat commission or that fat salary. So, you're going to basically end up with a doomer mindset once that company decides that you're one of the branches that's got to get pruned. That's what's going to happen. You're going to find yourself working in some terrible, crummy, scummy type of sales job, selling vacation packages over the phone, claiming that person on the other end, you won some prize, tickets to Disney or whatever the case. Nah, like you don't want to live that life. So you got to turn away from anything that is some kind of get rich quick scheme. You know what I mean? Or something that involves you pushing a lie, because the punishment after you stop selling that lie, you're going to get hit with that hard truth. And then when you're sitting around some call center selling vacation package, you're going to think, why am I here? Look what you did to get there. Look what you were doing before it. Is it nothing alike? So really think about that. And, the last thing is straight up vices. This can range from alcoholism to gambling to just being envious. This could be gluttony. Let's say that you're the type of person who refuses to cook. You could cook your meals, but instead, you're ordering DoorDash and you're eating terrible foods. That's all going to come back on you as well. And it perpetuates that cycle of misery because, again, if you cook a meal and, you buy all the ingredients or whatever, you cook that meal, there is actually a lot of satisfaction that you get at the very end of that meal. You're like, man, I treated myself like a king. And so you develop self-respect just from doing these little tasks and putting in a little work for yourself, So these are all things that can be expanded upon and talk about a little bit more. But for today, these are the things that are on my mind. So hope you guys have a great day. And any day you want, any moment you want, you can break the cycle. So think about it.